Hello, cuteness, and welcome to What Would Laura Do, where I get questions asked all throughout the week. So if you're someone that has a question or something that's on your heart and you want it answered about relationships or trauma or intimacy or life, you can send us it and we will answer it on these little Monday calls. And I got one this week from my insider community, and it hits so close to home around depression and grief and how that affects our intimacy in our life. So I had a client, someone inside of my program, ask, how do you feel about grief and depression affecting sex drive? Have you come across this much in your relationship coaching? Yes, and I've lived this. So much so that I remember I didn't understand the correlation between the two. I literally thought I was asexual. I remember partners at the time, like, I never led, I never felt confident to lead, I never felt the urge to, whereas now I feel like a freaking 16-year-old. And my clients do as well. It's like, once we can understand the different parts of our brain, which is what we're going to cover today, and what gets shut down and what gets turned on and how to turn that back on, and what hormones are at play, we get to take back control. And that's what I want you to feel ownership over, especially when it comes to sex and relationship and intimacy. Like, these are the taboo topics, I guess. And when we're not having a lot of sex, and this is so common with my high performing women, like, this is very common because a lot of the time we are so stressed out, we are struggling with some things that, like, by the time it comes to being intimate, it's like, I'm exhausted, I don't fucking want to. So let's understand the brain, let's understand what's going on, especially in this kind of dynamic, when you're also navigating grief and depression and the realness of life. So grief and depression and trauma and stress and all the things that happen in our day-to-day living shrink our brain. They shrink our brain. And what that does is that starts to, so the way that we connect with other human beings is our prefrontal cortex, right? So that's the front side. If you're listening to this on the podcast, I am pointing to the front of my head. We have our prefrontal cortex, then we have our limbic system, then we have our hypothalamus or hippocampus, and then we have our amygdala. And a lot of us navigate from our amygdala and we don't even realize it. So this will help you kind of understand. And this is what we're breaking down even more inside of Sacred Singlehood. So how do we balance our blood sugar levels? How do we actually grow these parts of our brain that shrunk? How do we understand our body and our cues and our things like this so that we can actually get back this banging ass sex drive and feel confident and feel like we're in control of ourselves? Like, this is what we're covering inside of Sacred Singlehood or inside of my one-on-one containers, like whichever is floating your boat at this moment. We can lean into that. But our brain shrinks, and grief in and of itself is usually due to trauma, right? Like, we have had something happen and now we're in this state of going through the 7 stages of grief, where it's like anger and bargaining and all that kind of stuff, until we can actually get to a place of normalcy. And if we're not yet in that space of normalcy, we have to let the human complete its cycle. Like, we got to get angry. We got to, do our bargaining skills. We got to, try and go backwards and all the kind of things. And then we get to the space of like, okay, I have to accept where I'm at. I have to accept where I'm at and what has happened. And I felt this so much after the loss of my mother. Like, I didn't even know I was going through the grief stages for years, and I still do. And when you're in these states, what happens, we're not in our prefrontal cortex. We are now moving through our limbic system, and we are now shutting down and being in a reactive state. And none of that is wrong. None of that is wrong. It's just the human experience. But when it starts to affect our partners, and that's when it does become this conflict, right? When we're sitting there and it's like our partners can come to us and they're like, hey, I'm not feeling connected to you, or I'm feeling this, or do you not have a sex drive? Is there something wrong with our sex life? Are you not attracted to me? Like, that really does weigh on the heart. And so we want to look at what's happening at our body and our mind. This is why we do the science and soul. So when we're looking at these kind of stuff, like, parts of our brain have shrunk. So how do we activate that, right? We're looking at things we want. This is why before we get into any healing and trauma work you're going to see in my practices, I address expanding the brain first, because a lot of the times when you're already going to therapy, this is why I love therapy and why I didn't find it beneficial in the beginning stages of my recovery and why I do what I do now, because there's parts of our body that need to get regulated before we start to look at what happened in our past. So yes, I'm sure, because I know the person that asked this question. I know you've already done therapy for years to navigate what you went through. But talk therapy can only do so much. We actually have to figure out a way to grow the parts of the brain that shrunk, the ones I listed earlier. And if we don't do that and we keep doing talk therapy, we're actually just revisiting trauma, and we're continually shrinking these things because we're setting off this response in our body. So when we're looking at this stuff, there's 3 ways we want to look: hot, cold, and silence. So hot yoga. I say hot Pilates because that's more my vibe. Cold plunges, silence, meditation. Different forms of that. But that will actually show your body in the show your body in its somatic practices how to strengthen and do hard things without revisiting the trauma and dealing with the grief head on. So there's other ways that you want to kind of set your body up for success before even diving into that stuff. Again, none of the, like, run everything by your doctor, do the kind of things, like, this is just information, it's the stuff on the internet, but like looking at how our brain works and that it does shrink, there are other things that we can do before we start to deal with things head on. Ultimately, you do want to look at the origin story and what's going on and how it's affecting your present moment, i.e. affecting your sex life, which is what you wrote in about. But there's things that you can do outside of, let me talk to my partner about sex, which sometimes isn't comfortable in and of itself. And oftentimes we shy away from it, where it's like, actually, I'm fucking fighting, like swimming through my swamps of sadness. And I know you know that, but hey, like, it's hard. So what can we start to do in our day-to-day practices? Like, the thing inside of my work is, it's what more can we add in, not what can we take away, right? So looking at what more can I add into my life? Hot yoga, hot Pilates, saunas, cold plunges, meditation, extended meditation practices, and witnessing your thoughts and things of that nature, but really looking at other practices that are outside of the traditional grief healing. You know, there's a lot of practices out there to look, or there's a lot of traditional methods to look at grief and what had happened, and, you know, healing circles and things of that nature, therapy and what have you. But there's other things that support the body so the body can actually hold going and revisiting that, because talk therapy can only get us so far. So those are great. Also understanding the hormonal changes that happen, like when we're in high stressful situations, our cortisol levels are pumping through our body, like fight, flight, like that's what's happening. Even if you don't feel necessarily like running and shutting things down and whatever, like your body is still pumping cortisol through itself. And if you're pumping cortisol, your estrogen shuts down. So like for me, what was going on is, like, I was in so much of a trauma response. I had 0 estrogen in my body when they tested me for it. And I hadn't had a cycle in, when did we hit that? Like, it had been about 5 years. It took me 6.5 to actually get it regulated again in my body. That's all of everything is connected, right? So it's, instead of just looking at these one things, it's like, let me look at all of it. Like, I didn't have a period, and I was having, you know, PTSD, and I had 0 sex drive to the point that I thought I was asexual, and like couldn't connect with partners, and we're having relationship conflicts. Like, all of it is connected, and that's why we take a holistic approach to all of this. But really looking at, you know, what else is pumping through your body. Go get your hormones checked, see what's happening there. What can we add in? What can we supplement? What can we really help in to softening the body so that she can start to produce it on her own again? But I can almost guarantee that's also what's happening, because I know the years that you've been going through. And when we're pumping cortisol through our body, everything else kind of shuts down, because at the time we don't need to be producing children. When we're stuck in fight or flight, we have to be able to fight or run away, right? And so if cortisol is super high, estrogen is very low. And so looking at things like that. And so really the solution here would be addressing the body's response to trauma, because trauma isn't necessarily the event. The trauma is your body's response to the event. And oftentimes when we look at traditional therapy and traditional practices, it's like, okay, let me just go address the problem, right? Let me go address the problem that I have no libido. Let me go to therapy. Let me go to couples therapy. Let me do X, Y, Z. But if we don't actually address the fact that the body has not completed a cycle that it got stuck inside of, and we haven't looked at the hormones, and we haven't looked at how to support the nervous system and to actually strengthen it, we haven't even realized which part of the nervous system that we're in, which there are 3, like, we're just trapped. We're just trapped. So we want to look at it. We want to address the trauma. We want to look at these kind of things and start to play with, where can I start to expand my cycle? Where can I start to expand my system? Where can I start to work on completing the cycle? Because oftentimes when we're stuck in this trauma response, something had happened and we got stuck. We didn't get to fight. We didn't get to flight. We didn't get to flee, you know? and we got stuck in the cycle. So where can we start to complete this cycle and to really get your body back into safety? Where can we start to get some hormones regulated in a natural way? Where can we integrate some more rest and intimacy and pleasure? And how can we get ourselves, especially because I know you said when it comes to grief and depression, that's usually when we're stuck in our dorsal phase. So we have 3 different phases of our nervous system. Ventral, which is when we're healthy and connected. That's like basically when we're living in our prefrontal cortex. And then we have our sympathetic. That's when we're very excited and we're passionate about things, or very angry and passionate about things. Or we have our shutdown, like Eeyore phase, when we're like calm and regulated. There's one way of doing that, but also there's this like shutdown, isolated depression, stuck in grief spell. So looking at these things, we do navigate all 3 of those so many times throughout the day, but we go through all of them. And if we want to get up, like if we're stuck in dorsal from depression, we have to use a little bit more of this like fiery side of things so we can get to ventral. But really it's like one of these I know there's a lot that I'm saying right now, but because it's such a, I know who this question is from, but there's so many of us that get stuck in this, and I want to give a broad overview to help you understand you're not stuck. Nothing is wrong with you. We don't need like hormonal supplements or anything like that. It's just understanding your body. Like nothing is necessarily wrong. We just have to look at it at a different lens with a solution-based approach so that we can start to take this into a holistic approach and to look at this and, you know, get the body calm. Ultimately, it's what we teach here, right? Like becoming a living sanctuary and looking at this and like letting your turn on of life be a thing, because it's not that we're trying to pretend what happened didn't happen. It's how now do we move forward with this, and we live in our strength, and we live in our sovereignty, and we live in this understanding of our body with this as something that's there, instead of shaming it or trying to like get over it and all these kind of things. It's like when things of this nature, when big T trauma event happens, that we're in these depression states, or we're in this grief state, and even little T trauma, like whatever, but we're stuck in this emotional thing. A lot of time it's like, how do I get out of it? It's like, sometimes when traumatic events happen, it's not that we get out of that memory because it's now in our hippocampus, but it's how do we now walk along with it with some strength and some understanding and some regulation tools and some nutrition aspect and some moving and completing the cycles and things of that nature. So I hope this helped you understand that like you're not broken with your sex drive and the arguments we have with our partners around this. It's like, here, pass this to them, share this with them with a conversation that might be hard to have, but you know, if you're here, it means you're doing the work. You're curious for something else, and like focus on that. Focus on the fact that you are adding things in. There's nothing wrong with you. Things have just happened. And in order to move through them, we have to complete the cycle, and we have to understand ourselves and give ourselves the compassion that we pray for at the end of the day. And so releasing the narrative that you have around it and what that means and how it goes and all that kind of stuff, hey baby, will really begin to set you free and welcome yourself home. Like it's just hormones, it's just trauma, it's just our brain. It shrinks, but it also grows. Like they're all muscles. We get to practice them, we get to move through them, we get to do all this kind of things. So I love you all so much. Hi, Sharpshoot Pants. I love you all so much. I know a lot of you watch these replays, so I'm excited, and I will also be sharing this over on the podcast, which if you haven't subscribed to that, what are you doing? I'm the coolest guest on this planet, and we talk about all of the things. But if you know anyone that is struggling with their sex drive, or maybe it's you, like maybe you have been going through some shit and you're struggling with this with your partner, and you know it's not you, but you don't know how to articulate or convey that to your partner, like share this with them. Share this with them in a way. Here, explain the brain, explain biology, because you're here and you led yourself here, and that means the world, and that means you're shifting and you're changing and you're fucking beautiful and you're powerful, and oh my goodness, I can't wait to see what even happens after this. So I love you. I'll see you in the next What Would Laura Do episode, and if you have any questions, you can always submit them here. It'll be me or Cassandra that answers you. But I love you. Happy healings.